Jack thought the HOA was just annoying until armed men showed up at his gate. And Emily? She didn't panic because she'd seen this kind of threat before. What started as a simple dispute over a truck turned into a full-scale intimidation attempt when armed imposters claimed they had authority to seize their property. They thought Jack and Emily would fold under pressure. They were wrong, because Emily wasn't just a homeowner, she was FBI trained. And this time, the people abusing power picked the wrong house. Stay until the end, because what happens next exposes how far intimidation can go, and how quickly it collapses when the truth fights back. Backhand index pointing right, like, subscribe, and comment, stand strong. If you believe no one should be bullied out of their own home. The lake used to feel like a promise. When we first bought the property, it felt like we were finally breathing after years of noise, deadlines, and crowded streets. The water stretched out calm and glassy most mornings, reflecting the sky like it was trying to hold on to something purer. Our ranch sat just far enough from a main road to feel private, but close enough that we didn't feel isolated. It was the kind of place where you could hear your own thoughts again. We didn't move there to impress anyone. We moved there to slow down. The truck everyone would later complain about had been with us for years. It wasn't flashy, but it was reliable. Scratched in places, sure, but every mark had a story. Hauling lumber for repairs, pulling neighbors out of ditches during storms, carrying feed and tools. It was part of our daily life, not a statement. We parked it beside the barn, where it had always been. For months, everything felt normal. Mornings meant coffee on the porch, watching fog lift off the water. Evenings meant quiet conversations and the sound of crickets. Neighbors waved when they passed. Some stopped to chat. There was no tension, no sense of conflict waiting in the air. Then the HOA president moved in. At first, we didn't even know who she was. Just another face at the end of the gravel road. A few weeks after she arrived, a neatly folded paper appeared in our mailbox. It wasn't aggressive, just informational. It mentioned community appearance standards and politely suggested we review vehicle placement guidelines. We laughed it off. We weren't even technically inside the HOA boundary. Or at least, that's what our paperwork said. A few days later, another message came. This one was firmer. It mentioned complaints. No names, of course, just concerned residents. It suggested our truck created visual inconsistency. That phrase stuck with me. Visual inconsistency. We tried to be reasonable. I sent a calm message explaining our property lines, attaching the survey documents. I even offered to meet in person to clear things up. There was no response. Instead, the tone shifted. Posts started appearing in the community group online. Photos of our property taken from the road. Comment about declining standards and people who don't respect shared values. No names, but everyone knew who it was about. Friends stopped liking our posts. Neighbors stopped waving. The peace we had come for started to slip away. My wife noticed it before I did. She noticed how the same car passed our driveway more than once a day. How someone took pictures a little too openly. How the language online became sharper, more personal. She's testing us, my wife said one night, scrolling through her phone, seeing how much pressure we'll take. I told her it was probably just HOA drama. Petty, annoying, but harmless. I was wrong. One afternoon, we found a bright notice taped to our gate. It looked official at a glance. Logos, formal wording, bold print. It claimed our vehicle violated safety codes and would be subject to enforcement if not removed. But the wording was sloppy, the formatting inconsistent, and the agency name slightly off. My wife stared at it for a long time. "This isn't real," she said quietly. That's when I saw something change in her. Not fear, focus. She started documenting everything. Screenshots, dates, times, vehicle descriptions. She didn't panic or rant. She observed. She organized. She prepared. Meanwhile, the atmosphere around us tightened. The lake didn't feel open anymore. It felt watched. The silence felt heavier. Every sound at night made me pause. Still, we stayed calm. We believed reason would win. We didn't know yet that reason had already left the conversation, and that the next step wouldn't be paper threats or online posts. It would be men with guns, standing at our gate, pretending to be something they weren't. And when that moment came, everything would change. The pressure didn't explode all at once. It crept in slowly, like a fog that thickened every morning until you couldn't see where the shoreline ended. After that fake notice appeared on our gate, things shifted in a way that felt deliberate, calculated. The messages online stopped pretending to be polite. They became sharper, more personal, and somehow more confident. Like whoever was behind them believed they had momentum now. My wife kept screenshots of everything, every comment, every time someone deleted a post, and rewrote it with softer wording. She noticed patterns most people would miss. The same accounts reacted within seconds, the same phrasing repeated by different profiles. It felt coordinated, not organic. Like someone was conducting a quiet campaign from behind a screen. Neighbors we'd known for years started acting distant. One woman who used to wave every morning suddenly crossed the road to avoid us. Another man muttered something about standards when he thought I couldn't hear him. It was unsettling how quickly people could be turned, how easy it was to plant doubt and let it grow. One afternoon, a white SUV parked near our gate and just sat there. The engine stayed running. Tinted windows. No markings. It stayed for almost 20 minutes before driving off slowly. That night, a new message appeared online claiming our property was under review and that authorities were aware of ongoing issues. That's when I started to feel in my chest, that tight, cold pressure being watched. I asked my wife if she thought we should call someone, maybe a lawyer, maybe the county. She shook her head. Not yet, she said. They want us to react emotionally. If we do, they control the story. She was calm, but I could tell she was alert in a way I hadn't seen before. She started waking earlier, checking the perimeter, making quiet notes on her phone. She never said much, but her eyes missed nothing. A few days later, another notice appeared. This one claimed to be from a regional compliance office. It warned of fines and possible asset seizure for non-compliance with community safety regulations. The language was aggressive, intimidating, and meant to scare us into submission. I felt anger rise in my chest. Who did these people think they were? My wife read it once, then laughed, a short, humorless sound. "This is fake," she said. "Badly fake." She pointed out the incorrect legal terms, the wrong formatting, the mismatched logos. To anyone trained, it screamed fraud. To an average homeowner already stressed, it could have worked. That realization made my stomach turn. This wasn't just about us anymore. If they were willing to do this to us, they could do it to anyone. The social pressure intensified. A few neighbors stopped responding to messages entirely. Someone anonymously reported our truck as abandoned. Another claimed it was a safety hazard. None of it made sense, but it created noise, and noise creates doubt. Then came the day we heard footsteps near the barn. I stepped outside and saw two men standing near our fence. Phones out, taking pictures. When I asked what they were doing, they said they were documenting community violations. One of them smirked when I asked who sent them. "You'll find out soon," he said. That night, my wife finally told me more about her past work. I knew she'd done government consulting, but not the details. She explained how intimidation campaigns work, how people are pressured slowly, pushed to comply without realizing they're being manipulated, how fear is more effective than force. "They're escalating," she said quietly, "and they think we'll fold." I asked her what happens if we don't. She looked at me for a long moment before answering. "Then they'll try something louder." The next morning, we found fresh tire tracks near the gate. Deep ones, heavy ones. And that's when I realized this was no longer about a truck or an HOA or petty rules. It was about power and how far someone was willing to go to take it. The morning it happened was strangely quiet. Too quiet. No birds, no wind, not even the usual creak of the dock shifting with the water. The air felt heavy, like the world was holding its breath. I remember standing at the kitchen sink, staring out the driveway, feeling that familiar tightness in my chest, the one that had been growing stronger every day. My wife was already awake. She stood near the window, coffee untouched, eyes scanning the tree line. She hadn't slept much. Neither had I. Then we heard it. Engines. Not the soft rumble of a neighbor passing by, but the slow, deliberate growl of multiple vehicles moving together. I stepped onto the porch just as two dark SUVs came into view, followed by a lifted pickup. They stopped just outside our gate, tires crunching against gravel like a warning. 4 men stepped out. They weren't dressed like local workers. No logos, no uniforms, just tactical clothing, boots, vests. One of them adjusted something at his waist. And that's when I saw the firearm, openly carried, not concealed, on purpose. My heart slammed against my ribs. One of them shouted my name like he already knew it. Another lifted a hand, signaling the others to spread out slightly. They moved with confidence, but not discipline. That detail mattered more than they realized. I took a step forward, then stopped when my wife's hand touched my arm. Her grip was steady. "Let me handle this," she whispered. She walked past me and onto the gravel, her posture calm, her voice level. No panic, no hesitation. "Can I help you?" she asked. The tallest man stepped forward. "We're here under authority to seize that vehicle," he said, pointing toward the truck. "You've been notified already." "By who?" she asked. He hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. Long enough. "County enforcement," he said. She nodded slowly. "Which county?" He glanced sideways at one of the others. "Regional authority." Her eyes sharpened. "Name the statute." Silence. I watched their confidence crack in real time. One man shifted his weight. Another adjusted his grip on his weapon, then seemed to realize how that looked and froze. "You're impersonating officials," my wife said calmly. "That's a felony." The man scoffed. "Ma'am, we don't want trouble. Just step aside and—" "Stop," she said louder now. Not shouting. Commanding. They did. She pulled out her phone and began recording, holding it steady so it captured all of them. "You're on private property. You are armed. You have no jurisdiction. And you've just crossed into criminal impersonation." Their confidence drained fast. One of them tried to laugh it off. "Look, lady, we're just doing a job." "Then you were lied to," she replied. "And now you're complicit." I could see it in their faces, the realization sinking in. They weren't prepared for this. They'd expected fear, confusion, compliance, not clarity. One of them muttered, "This wasn't supposed to go like this." My wife kept talking, calm and precise. She named laws, consequences, the exact steps that would follow if they didn't leave immediately. She spoke like someone who had stood in rooms where decisions carried real weight. And then she did something that made them all freeze. She said, "Law enforcement is already on the way." That was a lie, but a smart one. The man closest to her cursed under his breath. Another step back toward the truck. The one who'd been acting toughest now looked unsure, eyes darting between his partners. "You should go," she said. "Now." For a moment, I thought they might push it. My pulse pounded in my ears. My hands curled into fists. Then one of them nodded. "Let's go," he muttered. They backed away slowly, never turning their backs, then climbed into their vehicles. Engines roared to life, gravel sprayed, and within seconds they were gone. The silence afterward felt unreal. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like an hour. My wife finally lowered her phone. Her hands were steady, but I could see the tension in her jaw. "That's not over," she said softly. She was right, because as the dust settled, one thing became clear. Those men hadn't come up with this on their own. Someone had sent them, and whoever that was had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The silence after they left felt heavier than the confrontation itself. The air still smelled like dust and exhaust, and the gravel where their tires had spun was torn up like a scar across the driveway. For a long moment, neither of us moved. We just stood there, listening to the quiet settle back in, knowing it wasn't peace, just a pause. My wife finally exhaled and lowered her phone. Her hands trembled now that the danger had passed. That's when I realized how much control it had taken for her to stand that steady. "They'll try to spin this," she said. "We need to get ahead of it. She didn't waste time. Within minutes, she was making calls, calm, precise, professional, not panicked, not emotional, just factual. She reported armed impersonators, provided descriptions, and shared that we had video evidence. She used words carefully, the way someone does when they know every word might matter later. While she spoke, I walked the property. Tire marks, boot prints, a drop zip tie near the fence. Proof that this hadn't been imagination or paranoia. Someone had planned this. Not long after, real law enforcement arrived. The difference was immediate. Marked vehicles, clear identification, calm authority instead of forced confidence. They listened. They asked questions. They watched the video carefully, replaying moments where the men claimed authority they didn't have. One officer shook his head slowly. "This is serious," he said. "Impersonating officials while armed? That's not a misunderstanding. That's a crime." As they took statements, the full picture started to come together. The HOA president's name came up quickly. Apparently, complaints had already been made by other residents. Smaller things at first. Harassment, intimidation, threats hidden behind community standards. Our situation just pushed it too far. The officers explained that the men who came to our property had been hired through a private contact. Cash payment, no paperwork. A loose chain meant to create distance between the person giving the orders and the people carrying them out. But it wasn't enough. Phone records, messages, and witness statements were already connecting dots. By the time the officers left, the sun was high in the sky, and exhaustion hit me all at once. The adrenaline drained, leaving behind a strange mix of anger and relief. Neighbors started coming by that afternoon. Quiet knocks, hesitant apologies. Some admitted they'd been afraid to speak up. Others said they believed the rumors because they sounded official. A few looked ashamed. One older man stood at the edge of the driveway and said softly, "I should have said something sooner." I nodded. We all should have. That evening, the online post vanished. Accounts were deleted. Threads disappeared. It was like someone trying to erase a mess before anyone else could see it. But it was too late. By the next morning, word had spread. Not gossip, truth. People talked about the armed men, about the fake authority, about how far someone had gone to push neighbors around. The HOA board called an emergency meeting. The president didn't show. Then came the news we've been bracing for. An investigation had officially begun. Not just into the incident, but into misuse of HOA funds, intimidation tactics, and fraudulent enforcement actions. My wife read the notice quietly, then set it down. She thought power meant control, she said. But real power always leaves a trail. That night, we sat on the porch again, the lake reflecting the moon like nothing had ever happened. But everything had changed. The fear that once crept around the edges of our home was gone, replaced by something steadier. Resolve. We hadn't set out to challenge anyone. We just refused to be bullied out of our own lives. And in doing that, we cracked open something much bigger than ourselves. Whatever came next, hearings, charges, consequences, we were ready. Because the truth had a way of surfacing. And once it did, there was no putting it back under the water. The days that followed felt strangely calm, like the quiet after a storm when the air still carries electricity, but the sky is finally clear. The investigation moved forward in the background, steady and methodical. We didn't hear every detail, and honestly, we didn't want to. What mattered was that the fear was gone. The tension that had wrapped itself around our home had loosened its grip. People started stopping by again, not out of curiosity, but solidarity. Neighbors we barely knew brought coffee, baked bread, or simply stood with us for a few minutes, saying nothing at all. Some apologized for staying silent. Others admitted they'd been scared too, afraid of becoming targets if they spoke up. No one judged them. Fear as a way of shrinking people, and understanding that made forgiveness easier. One evening, a woman from down the road stood at our gate and said, "You reminded us that this is still our community, not hers." Her voice cracked as she said it. That moment stayed with me. The HOA board eventually released a statement. It was carefully worded, full of legal language and distance. The president had stepped away pending review. Committees were being restructured. Policies were being reevaluated. It was the kind of language meant to sound calm while quietly admitting everything had gone wrong. We didn't celebrate. We didn't feel like winners. What we felt was relief and a sense of responsibility we hadn't expected. My wife and I talked late into the nights about what had happened, about how easily power can be abused when people stop paying attention, about how fear works best in silence, and about how close we'd come to being pushed out of a life we work hard to build. She admitted that standing in front of armed strangers had terrified her. Not in the moment, but afterward, when her body finally caught up with her mind. I told her I'd never been more afraid than watching her do it. We laughed softly at that, because fear had been everywhere that day, even if we refused to let it win. Slowly, the lake returned to what it had been. Kids fished from the dock again. Neighbors waved without hesitation. The air felt lighter, safer. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the water in gold, we sat on the porch and talked about what we'd learned. Not in big speeches, just honest thoughts, shared between two people who'd been tested. Power, we realized, doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it hides behind rules, paperwork, and titles. Sometimes it counts on people being too tired or scared to question it. And sometimes it only takes one moment of calm resistance to unravel it completely. What saved us wasn't strength or authority. It was clarity, knowing who we were, knowing what was right, and refusing to surrender that, even when it would have been easier to give in. The truck still sat by the barn, just as it always had. It hadn't changed. We had. We learned that peace isn't something you're given by rules or committees. It's something you protect, sometimes quietly, sometimes loudly, but always together. And when the lake settled into stillness again, it didn't feel fragile anymore. It felt earned.